everyone. My name is Mandy Chang, and I lead the Stanford Venture Studio here at Stanford, where we have the pleasure of supporting student entrepreneurs. Over the years, I've had the joy of hearing from amazing founders and leaders, which is why I'm super excited about this upcoming session. It's my privilege to introduce Fern Mandlebaum, who will interview two amazing, successful, inspiring, and thoughtful leaders in the sustainable food space, Julia Collins and Nick Halla. Fern is Managing Director of Early Stage Investments at Emerson Collective. Emerson invests across stages and sectors, but is most active in the climate and sustainability space. Some of her investments include Conduit, Switch Bio, Repurpose Global, Reaply, 12, and Anthro. She has created and has taught 3 classes at the business school: entrepreneurship from diverse perspectives, power, building the entrepreneurial mindset, and equity by design, building diverse and inclusive organizations, and is recreating a class and program she used to teach for the engineering PhDs and postdocs called Emerson Consequential Scholars. Fern has been, coached, and invested in entrepreneurs her whole life. She loves helping entrepreneurs scale their companies, particularly those helping people reach their full potential and addressing critical systems level problems. Fern is committed to building and expanding the ecosystem and helping people, regardless of their background, see that they can be consequential entrepreneurs and investors. Hand it to you, Fern.
Thank you, Mandy. I am going to ask Nick and Julia to introduce themselves and to share. They have such deep backgrounds. For this audience, I'd like you to share what you think, this audience would like to hear the most about you. Nick, can you kick us off?
Sure, I'm happy to. Usually when I introduce myself, I do through a pretty complete story, because my background ties essentially to how I grew up. I grew up in a small town in Minnesota on a family dairy farm. And I say that because sustainability is all tied to being on a dairy farm. We're in the land 365 days of the year. So even in high school, I was looking at doing renewable energy projects, because I really like technology. I want to have an impact in the world. As a farmer, our job is to maintain the land and upgrade it essentially as we do this, but we're really not doing that right now in most places. So I wanted to change that. And the other part of farming is it's a family business. It is a form of entrepreneurship. A lot harder in a lot of ways in the Silicon Valley form of entrepreneurship, because you have to do everything with essentially no money. And so I always wanted to start companies. My brothers and sisters always have, and I wanted to do sustainability. So that led to engineering, did that. But I was like, I'm done with the farm. I'm not going to do agriculture ever again. And then I went to study chemical engineering. I looked at renewable energy, batteries, biofuels, and I ended up at General Mills, designing products and manufacturing systems with no plans to go into food. It was great to learn how to commercialize products and bring things to the market from the technical side. But I really wanted to be that bridge between science, technology, big ideas, and making a real business out of it that can scale and have an impact. So it brought me here to the MBA MS here, tried to start 8 businesses when I was in grad school here, worked in a solar cogeneration company, and then through that, I literally had done nothing in food and agriculture for 2 years while I was here. And then I met Pat Brown. He was a professor in the medical school, and he had an idea for how to really change the food system. And I joined him as his first employee, and that became Impossible Foods. And then we built Impossible Foods for the next 11 years, scaled it from the 2 of us to 800-person company, global business, and really changed the way people think about food. Because when I looked at this from an impact perspective, you'd hear about the energy conversion, the electric cars. No one ever talked about the impact of food. But as 40 to 45% of the land globally is used for food production, almost all animal agriculture, more fresh water than any other industry, more than 15% of greenhouse gases, more than transportation, and almost all the drive of species loss and just wild animal degradation. And it's and no one's doing it. And the way to do that is attack it as a technology. Food is a beef cow is a 3% efficient technology of converting plants to meat. Where else do we use a 3% efficient technology? So we went out to beat it. And so I've been in that for a while, and now I'm working on starting a climate invention factory commercialization system to do what I did at Impossible in Kite Hill and Interplant at a scale. So we're aiming to start about 2 companies a year, find technologies that could have a really big impact, and then get the team, technology, business model, partnerships all ready to fly.
So, Nick, you grew up on a dairy farm in Minnesota, and I grew up in San Francisco. So in that way, we're not similar. But one thing that's really very similar about our stories is that at a certain point, we were just absolutely shocked by how little investment there was in the food, relationship between food and climate. Like, these statistics are so startling. 15 to 25% of global greenhouse gas emissions attributable to land use in food systems, more water consumption than any other industry, and on and on and on. So my story, it's so funny, I was driving up here to Vitellakis, parked and walked over, and I had all of these flashbacks. One from being a student at the GSB, I'm GSB 09, and just feeling so fired up and excited about the potential of building a career in food, but not really knowing how. Second, being a guest lecturer, I think in Erica Plombeck's class, and rolling up to campus with this crazy robot-enabled pizza truck that we had designed at Zoom Pizza, and like opening up the doors and serving pizza to students. Next, coming to campus after I just had launched Moonshot, this wonderful snack business that I launched with my team, which was all about centering regenerative agriculture in the conversation around snacking, and sold that to Patagonia a little bit more than a year ago. And now coming back to campus as the CEO and founder of PlanetFWD, which is a B2B SaaS platform that works with big companies like Amazon to decarbonize not just the 15% of global greenhouse gas emissions that come from land use and food systems, but the 60% that come from the household sector more broadly. So I share each of those vignettes as an example of how the entrepreneurial journey is one that can meander a bit. You know, sometimes you're absolutely in love with one thing, maybe it were what you were doing at General Mills, and that leads to an insight or a new relationship, like the one that you found with Tom Brown, and you just kind of find your way as you go. But there's always a through line, right? Like, my through line is I fundamentally believe in the power of the private sector and technology companies to bring about the most sweeping changes that we need to move humanity forward. I really think it has to be tech, and it has to be the private sector as the tip of the spear, and then everything else, policy and markets, follow suit. And I'm absolutely in love with the relationship between, consumers, right? What we eat, what we wear, what we choose to bring into our lives, and the incredible power that has to change the way that the world works. And one other point of connection is, and we never would have guessed this, Nick was the co-founder of Impossible Foods, and now PlanetFWD is working with Impossible Foods. So another thing that I hope happens today is that connections are sown and made, because sometimes it's that person who you meet at one of these conferences or that you sit next to who becomes your next investor, co-founder, or friend.
This panel is about scaling sustainability, and this is so important to Emerson Collective and clearly to everyone in this room. How do you do it? How did Impossible Foods seem like an impossible dream? How did you do that? How did it become a household name? How many people in here know the Impossible Foods? Right? Like, what the heck? That's incredible. It's like Kleenex. And so...
We're getting there. That is the goal at some point.
Maybe not quite. I like to think something, and then maybe it'll happen. And then Julia, same for you. How do you get there with PlanetFWD? So Nick, can you kick us off?
Yeah, I think we start with this. And when we started the company, I started talking to Pat about this, and I was like, well, I guess you have like a Boca Burger, and you have Morningstar, and you have the other products, but they're really catered to vegetarians and people who have already made that choice. And so for us to scale, it started from day one that we have to outcompete the animal. If you want to scale something, and we talked on the panel at lunch too, it is you have to have a better product, you have to be cheaper, you have to have some better utility to the purchaser, whether it's a customer, a company, or a consumer, for them to do that. And so to scale a company, I think you have to start with that as like an ethos from the start. For us, it's like our consumer is the avid meat lover. That's the only way we're going to be able to scale to have the impact and the size of the business to have that impact. And so we started there, then that led to the approach of building the company, where it's very heavy research for many years. We spent 5 years developing technology, science, understanding of food to be able to create a really simple product that consumers could understand, we could explain, that could compete head on head with the animal and beat it. And so then we were doing this, and now you get to real scale. we're hard tech. We have to produce stuff. And so how do we start doing this? We're a very scientific organization to start with. We don't know how to scale. It's like, that's what I did at General Mills. But as a company, that wasn't our ethos for the first 5 years. And so we did find a facility. We put a lease on. We started building it out. But knowing that was going to take a year to 2 years, and we needed to train ourselves now how to be a commercial organization. And so we did start small. And so when you think about scaling, a lot of times it's not necessarily your scale at day one. It's how do you ramp up to that scale in the path. And so we went to a handful of restaurants, started building the brand, getting the excitement behind it, doing a lot of the education, because people did not know the connection between their food and the environmental impact of that. And we took it as our responsibility to drive that, to educate, be transparent in how we do it and why this matters. And once we started getting that flywheel going with some of the kind of high-end restaurants, you went to better burger chains, then we really started scaling, you get to the big partnerships. And so if we wanted to create the entire thing, and early on, we were doing all the ingredients ourselves. We were doing all the design, all the production. We thought about making our own restaurants. It's like, you're never going to scale that way, right? And so you have to pick out as a company, where do we really add value? And it's the design and the creation of the products. And then we did some manufacturing, but most of the manufacturing is actually with partners now. But we did the early stuff because we wanted to be able to iterate quickly, because we needed to change. We needed to make it better and better and better. As we got the commercial side, you get those first parts, then you get to the White Castle. Hey, now it's not just for the coastal elites. This is getting to middle America. Then you get to Burger King, which is across the board, and as those ramped up, the brand starts getting more following. Then we went to retail. So by the time we went to retail, a lot of people like you had already heard of us, and so we could drive really fast growth in retail. And it was all calculated to say, we can only produce so much volume. How do we use it really well? How do we build the brand? How do we tell the story? And how do you really ramp up to that scale? And that's all a nice, pretty story. We also got it wrong. It's like we scaled faster than we thought. We scaled the sales faster than we were ready to produce. We thought we could. And then we got the Burger King deal, and if people remember in like 2019, it was pretty tough because we couldn't produce enough to meet it. And so then everybody was in allocation, and that definitely hurt the business for a while. It took a while to recover. And I think every hard tech company goes through a learning like that.
Julia, we could talk about moonshot crackers, and for anyone that's eaten them, they're really yummy. My husband and I, we open a box, and you're like done with the box. But that was sold to Patagonia Provisions, and we're delighted about that. Can you explain a little bit about what you're actually doing at PlanetFWD, and how you got to where you are now, and how do you scale it going forward? Yeah. Can you really dig into how you've built this business?
Absolutely. And by the way, I remember when you launched in White Castle, because I was living on the East Coast at the time, and that was a big, big effing deal.
Oh, do you remember what we did as a brand campaign with that?
Remind me.
We did it with Wu-Tang Clan.
That's probably why I do it.
Wu-Tang Clan goes to space eating Impossible Burgers. Why? I have no idea.
I need to hear this full story after this. So PlanetFWD, so we are a B2B SaaS company, so that's kind of a known thing. We make software and we sell it to other big companies. But what's special about what we do is we've built a software that makes it very easy for companies with large and complex supply chains who have very heavy Scope 3 emissions to understand not just what their emissions are, but what the source of those emissions are. So imagine if you could build a digital twin of a global supply chain and unveil what was causing the greenhouse gas emissions. Was it the farm level impacts, things like tillage, inputs, the climate zone or the moisture regime? How about the manufacturing processes? How are the animals or how are the products being manufactured? What are the culling rates? What are the fermentations? What's happening with manure management? Every single aspect of how crops and animal systems are managed creates some greenhouse gas impact. It's very, very challenging to understand all of those impacts unless you have the data and the software. So as a user of PlanetFWD, you log into our platform and you can see at a very detailed level the sources of all your greenhouse gas emissions. You can also look at land and land use change if you're concerned about deforestation. You can see energy impacts, water impacts, and even biodiversity impacts. And it's not just that we show them to you. We have a simulation tool which allows you to understand what levers you can pull to bend your curve toward net zero. So what would it look like to improve your culling rates or improve your manure management or use renewable energy? And so all of these decisions that you can make as an organization to accelerate your path to net zero now become operationalizable and easy to track and manage as you go. So it's really a decarbonization platform more than a carbon accounting solution, and it's designed to help big companies take action on impacts that have felt very hard to see, let alone to manage and reduce. The question is about scaling, and I think many of us have read maybe Masters of Scale, or we've got a good perspective on what it takes to scale a business. But the question is not just about scaling, it's how do you scale sustainably? And a cynic might say those two things are at odds with each other. Maybe sustainability is at odds with scale, or certainly that's what we see a lot of the time, isn't it, right? Much of what exists in our world that's unsustainable is often linked to the fact that we need to do it at scale, right? We gave up on optimizing for end of life, or optimizing for carbon impact, or optimizing for other elements of sustainability because we wanted to grow quickly. This is often kind of the line that you hear. But I think we're really in a new day. I think the technologies that Nick's working on now and that I'm working on at PlanetFWD really are evidence that you can scale sustainably. And here's how. So if you want us to scale sustainably, the sustainability has to be embedded in the product. It can't be like once we reach 10 million users, then we'll do a little give back. Or once we reach a certain level of efficiency, then we'll be able to optimize for this element. Like if you really want to scale sustainably, the impact has to be embedded into the solution so that for every nth user that comes on board, or every, incremental $1 million in revenue that you're doing, you're participating in decarbonization, or you're moving the needle. And that takes, I think, a lot of intention at the very beginning. It also takes having the right capital partners. Right, this is why I'm so proud that Emerson is backing PlanetFWD. You have to have investors who understand that that is part of the agenda from day one, and who aren't forcing you into a paradigm where you're giving up something on sustainability in order to achieve maybe faster growth or faster path to profitability. It's really not easy, but you have to be intentional.
Julia, I'm hoping you can share a little bit, like when we've actually gone deep in looking at companies' data. People assume it's the packaging or can you give a little example of some of the things you've found?
Yeah. I mean, when you're working with consumer products companies, you're often working with teams that don't have a tremendous amount of climate literacy. About 5 years ago, only a third of the Fortune 100 had a head of sustainability or a chief sustainability officer. Now that number is closer to 70%. Which means that most people are new in this role, or the role is totally new to the organization. So you're working with people who fundamentally don't have a high level of climate literacy. They know a lot about product development and marketing and how to manage stakeholders within their organizations. They're wonderful people, but you're often coming up against folks who don't necessarily have the knowledge to be able to understand what's happening with their products, and that's why you need to use data. Packaging is a great example. Often when we look at a life cycle assessment for a consumer packaged good, the packaging impact is 3% or less. 3% or less of the greenhouse gas emissions intensity for an average, let's say, food CPG product, it's so tiny. And what's happening there is that there's this tension between what the data say and what the perception is in the market. Because when a customer goes to look for a sustainable product, they're looking for certain cues. They're looking for maybe a craft brown color or something that feels like cardboard. And so I'm not saying brands shouldn't invest in more sustainable packaging because you want to do that to meet the consumer need, but you can't use your guts or your hunches alone to kind of get your way to a sustainable organization. You have to lean in on the data, and that's why you really have to work with a partner.
I'll add one thing that I would really love is a lot of companies really don't know where their sustainable impact comes from or what it could come from. And so I hear this a lot. There's been a lot of talk around Scope 2 or Scope 3 emissions and some of the new regulations coming out. And a lot of the push on Scope 3 is there's no way we can do that. We don't know how to do that. No one really knows how to do Scope 3, which is not true. It's really an excuse, and you're kind of opening up that door now to have solutions like, hey, if that is a challenge, we can solve that for you actually with a very simple solution that then it enables the company then to actually go into the real sustainability impact of their business.
Absolutely. Building on both of those points, perception. How do you build a sustainable brand? How do you gain the trust of customers, whether it's an enterprise, consumers? Like, share a little bit about that whole process.
All right. Yeah, we thought a lot about this with Impossible. It's for two real reasons. One is we do need to create a really trusted brand, good brand, and also just the right thing to do. And the second reason, by doing that, it also protects our business in a lot of ways. Because we knew we were trying to upend a very big, very powerful industry. And I think that building a trusted brand and protecting ourselves against that, we're very tied. And the best thing you can do to build a trusted brand, anything, and especially in sustainability, is be extremely transparent in what you're doing, what you have, what you don't have, where you're going, where you want to go that you're not there yet, and you invite people in. And so this came to the consumer education portion too, where we had a lot of earned media was kind of our strategy early on. And so we would invite reporters to our office, to our research, to our manufacturing, and to our customers too. And we'd build that entire chain of where our product goes, what we're doing, while then being very transparent about what's in our product, what does it mean, where does everything come from, so that we could have that trust with the consumer, have the trust in the sustainability story and the data behind it, being a very scientifically driven organization, which then also protected us from the attacks that we knew were going to come after us. And I think no matter what you do in a sustainability brand, and I talk to a lot of the companies I advise and founders, like, oh, we do this, but we don't really talk about it. It's like, well, why not? It's like the best thing you can do is help educate and help pull people along the journey with you, because then they're also going to be more vested in you and what you're doing too, the more you pull them on the journey with you too.
I agree. Transparency is a really, really good way to build trust. And this other thing that you said resonates with me, because I know many of us are worried about greenwashing and the impact of greenwashing on eroding consumer trust, and frankly just not allowing us to build the solutions fast enough that are really going to get us there. I also worry about green hushing. And I see organizations that are actually doing fantastic things on sustainability, but who are afraid to talk about them in the market. We call it green hushing because they're so worried about greenwashing that they're sort of not telling their story. And I actually think data-driven stories of impact are really important. Data alone are not enough to make massive change. It's the way that data can lead to the storytelling that actually is what causes movements, not just like little blips in trends here and there, but whole markets to move forward. The other thing is, whatever you're making, do a good job at it. Like, you made a very, very tasty burger. First and foremost, I think you spent, I don't know how much effort making sure that it was just dang delicious. The same was true at Moonshot. Nobody would really care about regenerative agriculture or climate-friendly snacking if we didn't first build a cracker box that, you opened the box and you ate all of them. So whatever you're making, you have to make it really good. If you're making food, it has to be delicious. If you're making sustainable fashion, it has to really look good. If you're building batteries, they have to have high performance. So you can't sacrifice quality at the expense of sustainability, because ultimately you're just going to generate more churn and more waste.
GigaClimate, tell us a little bit about what you're actually doing and how, when you think about what you're working on, how are you, out of all, there's so much you can do, where are you focusing?
Yeah, good question. So I left Impossible about 1.5 years ago. I'd been there about 11 years. We've done a lot of great work, and I just had a bunch of new ideas how I could personally have a bigger impact in climate going forward. And I wanted to kind of pursue where those go. And so I kind of started with, what am I good at? What do I really enjoy? And I love finding scientists, technologies, things that could really have a big impact globally, and then making them real. And it's at Cogenerative, that's what I was hired at, the solar company before Impossible, Kite Hill, Interplant, and a lot of the other companies I'm advising is like, oh man, what could I kind of institutionalize this and do this more rapidly and help others do it? And then I came back to, I was like, wait a second. One of my high school dreams was to recreate Thomas Edison's invention factory for sustainability and climate. And I was like, now that would be fun. And it's like, maybe I could actually pull it off now. And so I started diving into kind of that, what I really enjoy, what I love, and that dream of what I wanted to put together. And so I started putting this together. And so what we are is we find technologies that have something on the brink of commercialization that could really have an impact. we can scale quickly to have a very good impact at scale, along with a business at scale, because those two have to be tied. And then we find that we kind of come in at the formation stage. It could come from a university, it could come from our own research, it could come from an a government research organization, spin out of a company. It doesn't really necessarily matter. But at that point, then we take them, form the company, get the team, technology, business model, partnerships, all kind of high functioning and high flying, and build it for about 18 to 24 months. And then we'll kind of spin it out with a Series A investment and have it like probably several X faster with a much higher probability of success if it went on its own. Because there's so many technologies that could have a huge impact that never see the light of day. And our job is to make those see the light of day and move a lot faster than they would otherwise.
So as it relates to Impossible, one of these many technologies and teams that you're working with, Julia, for you at PlanetFWD, what are the big challenges?
I mean, it's a different challenge every week.
Every day.
It's so interesting because I've definitely had the experiences of challenges that were intrapersonal, right? My own well-being, my own energy levels, my own mindset, you know, my ability to stay creative and optimistic in the face of what can be, you know, a punishing amount of rejection or stress, really. So that's like a bucket. And I think the way that you get through those, we were joking a little bit about this, you have to sleep. If you're a founder, you need to figure out your sleep practice and double down on it. If you're an investor in founders, you need to figure out how to make sure that founders are well. I'm not even joking. Then there's like another bucket of challenges which relate to your organization. You know, how are we growing? How is the team performing? You know, how are we thinking about inclusion? And that's like another bucket. And the way that I think you solve those is actually just more at-bats. I think the more times you have to go through something challenging like a reduction in force or like hyperscale, you just get better at it, and having good advisors is helpful. And then the third bucket are sort of the macro challenges, which are generally out of your control. And I think the best thing that you can do to weather any of those is just focus on the fundamentals. You know, are you scaling profitably, or do you have a path to get there? Do you have the right investors on board? Does your model actually make sense? And are you revisiting your model periodically to really throw darts at it and make sure that it grows? But there's never a point where I've ever said, oh, I have no challenges right now. and I don't think it will. And like sometimes folks who are, you know, thinking about entrepreneurship or thinking about moving from the corporate sector to entrepreneurship ask me, like, what's the single thing that I should be thinking about? And what I say is sometimes shocking, but I say expect obstacles. Expect the obstacles, because they're always going to come. And then when they come, you're like, oh, hi, obstacle. You know, I was expecting you. You're not a sign that I'm going to totally die right now. You're a sign that I need to move over or around or through.
As you're building these companies, and then I do want, we only have 5 minutes left, so if anyone has a question, think about it, because we got to at least take 2 questions. But Nick, as you're looking at building these companies, you know, what are the, in building a sustainability company, what are the biggest challenges you see right now?
I mean, I always start in the optimist side first, and then I get to the challenges. I think the exciting part is the need for sustainability is massive across every industry. And the exciting part is there's so many people who want to work at it and want to make a difference and want to be a part of that system. Like at Impossible, we would like put a new rollout in a new country when we're launching, and within 2 months we'd have over 1,000 people apply for it. Now, if you think the incumbent industry got that, if they put the same rollout, not even close, maybe dozens. And so you could see how much people in the younger generation really wants to work on sustainability. Now, the challenge that we hit is we are so far behind. And this is the part that people ask if you kind of get the doom kind of feeling, essentially, of like, you know, the environmental catastrophe hitting and this, that, and everywhere. And I was like, yeah, you can see that, but I kind of always go back to the optimist part. Is like, we're very good at innovating and finding solutions. And it's like, it is real. It's like there's 55 to 60 gigatons worth of CO2 equivalent emissions every year. And it's still going up, and we need to be down about 40% by 2030 to stay under 1.5 Celsius. That's a big, big get that we have to go get. Now, when I think about what we're doing at GigaClimate to try to address that, is we do have all the decarbonization work that we need to kind of take that number down, but there are 2 other areas that are starting to take off. One is adaptation resilience. It is changing. How do we reduce the impact? And as we do this, now more people are working on this. That's going to help people's lives be better, societies be better, and help the environment withstand some of these changes. And we are starting to look at a lot of things like carbon capture, methane destruction, things like this, where we can start pulling back a lot of negative engineering we're doing. And so we're seeing all these new approaches being taken to solve some of these big issues. Now, the fundamental issues we're so far behind, but there's a lot of ways to catch up.
Yep. Yeah, I like that. Hand went right up. Here, I'm going to bring you the...
Thank you. You probably agree that sustainability includes many grand challenges: biodiversity, poverty, climate change. I'm wondering if you face contradictions between like a different parts of sustainability in your activity, and if so, how you deal with that. Do you prioritize? Do you try to balance? Do you try to sacrifice something? Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, this is a tension that we feel every day. Sometimes you're working with a customer and they're really, really working to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions and also improve their end-of-life impacts. And so they want to shift maybe over to something like compostable packaging. Well, in many cases if we do the life cycle assessment of compostable packaging, you'll find that it's dramatically higher in emissions, but of course much better for end-of-life. And so there is no such thing as perfect. I think you just have to recognize the complexity and interdependency of systems and work on what makes sense for your organization to tackle, and understand that you're not going to be able to solve it all with just your organization or just your solution, but double down on the place where you have an unfair advantage. And so if you have the opportunity to dramatically make a difference in your respective sector, do that first, and then work in collaboration with others who maybe are more uniquely positioned to go after another impact.
And I can answer with a really quick one where, as we're looking at different ingredients and as we're really starting to scale the business, like you have to, for a hard tech company and a food company, it's about your ingredients coming in, your product, and then how you distribute it, and what consumers see. And we had to make a choice where one of the key proteins we were using was all sourced out of the US, but that source and that supply for like non-GM soy, as an example, is relatively limited what you could do. And so we had a choice of, well, we could start sourcing from Brazil to pull this in, or we could start using GM soy. And as a scientific organization, we're like, well, the GM soy, there's nothing wrong with it, but there is a negative consumer perception. So which one do we want to choose here? And so we looked at this like, well, the right call very clearly is to use the US produced GM soy. But now what we have to do is like get ahead of the messaging. We have to talk to consumers. We have to do more education. It does add some risk to the business. But it's very clearly the right call for sustainability, for the business, for across the board. And then we had to we did a lot of work on that to educate when we went through it. And it turns out when we did that, and we were really transparent, it wasn't an issue.
Great talk. I just want to get back to the packaged goods space, food in particular. And I'm curious if you could tell us, Julia, in particular on the snack food side, but also on potentially alternative meat. What do you see in which category, whether it's snack food or whether it's packaged food or pre-prepared food or whatever? Where are the new opportunities where we can sort of move out of the specialized space into a broader audience of consumers? And are there any companies that you can talk about in particular?
I'd love to point you, in addition to what I'm going to share, to a McKinsey Nielsen study that came out recently. And if we don't have a way to connect, I will somehow get it to you. But it gives a really good graphic on which segments within CPG are growing fastest in terms of sustainability. It also shows that brands that can credibly message their sustainability are growing 8% faster than brands who do not. And if you've ever owned a CPG company, there are not a lot of ways to gain an 8% growth premium. You're normally trying to string together a dozen solutions to eke out our 1 to 2% growth premium. What I would say is you'd be hard-pressed to find a category where that isn't true, where there isn't some white space opportunity to create a new brand or to expand the sustainability story of a given brand. And so I couldn't point you to one category versus another. It's happening across the space. But that study will give you a more granular perspective. Some of the companies that I'm excited about, I'm really excited about a company called Matriarch Foods. They are creating an upcycled platform for upcycling ingredients for pasta sauces, for broths, for that entire category. And they're doing it using upcycling, and their emissions intensity is 30% lower than their counterparts, Matriarch Foods.
Cool, and I'll really answer quickly, and I don't think I've told you this before. My General Mills job was in snacks. It was my first job. It was fruit snacks and granola bars and Chex. But yeah, that's how I learned too. So I learned in that world. But I think it's like obviously I have a very specific viewpoint on this. I think for the plant-based meat and just plant-based foods generally across meat and dairy, they're both just starting. It's like there's 750 billion pounds of meat consumed globally every year, and a tiny, tiny, tiny fraction of that is plant-based in a comparative like usage case, and we have to change that. And so from an innovation, like Impossible had a good kickoff on this to really change it, but where it's just getting started on what we need to do and what we can do.
I think ending on that, we've just started, right? I mean, it's so exciting to see all of you in this room because we are at the very beginning of what has to be so much change, and there's so much opportunity. And I hope you all go out there and just scale this whole thing. So thank you so much. Thank you, Julia and Nick.
Thank you.